Another patch, another tier list, and this time we have quite a few changes, not too many, but still some that shake up the meta. Jokes aside, it's still the same. Let's start with the Baron lane. Here we have a slight change when it comes to the best carry champion, and this time it's Fiora. Now her first ability targets tower and will make her even more powerful in the split pushing scenario. This will be absolutely broken and makes her even more of a threat when the game continues, and direct counter picks do not really exist unless obviously you have jungle assistance. Nonetheless, in the early game, there are quite a few champions that can go toe-to-toe with her and even put her behind, but in the late game, brutally outscale her. For example, Mr. Jax. This guy is quite annoying, but in the late game gets absolutely obliterated by Fiora, but in the early game, can kinda stomp her if he's better. The same applies to Camille. And if you're a lucky one and you're playing as a Vladimir and the Fiora has no clue what to do, takes wrong runes, etc., then you're also in for a good entertainment ride. But other than Fiora, a few other picks are quite problematic right now, and here we have the newly buffed Akali. This champion's movement speed is simply not fair, and all these buffs were completely unwarranted. And another buff comes to Jace. In the Baron lane, he wasn't as dominant because he just gets ganked and other champions kinda bash him into the ground if they get slightly ahead. But in the mid lane, he's absolutely broken. But now, he's even better than before. And if you play him really well, which you kind of need to, you'll get ahead quite often and take over the game completely on your own. And every champion in the A tier or below is simply not as consistent or strong enough. For example, take a look into the B tier. What do these champions even do? They simply exist and get absolutely stomped by any other champions in the higher tier. For the tank tier, we have Ornn as the most broken champion for the 19th billion time. This champion simply is too strong, for multiple reasons. Number 1, the teamfight presence with his ultimate ability. Number 2, the crafting thing. And number 3, the scaling thing with his passive, making him unbelievably tanky and literally unkillable while he kills you. Lovely champion and will certainly get nerfed again, maybe next year. Anyway, the other champion in the S tier still is a very good and high stat champion that is very good in the current meta. For example, Garen, Sa, and Shen and Mundo really perform well into the most champions you have on the roster and are good weak side champions, which makes it very easy for your team to survive and you being the frontline for them. Champions in the A tier are just substantially worse than the other champions, and champions in the B tier are, well, just don't touch them. Sorry, Singed. For the jungle role, we don't have many changes here. We still have Evelynn as one of the most broken carries in the game, Kayn is still there, Jace is still there, even though he was kinda nerfed for jungle, which doesn't really do anything to him though. But we have a champion that we lifted up into the S tier simply for one reason, and it's the people's stupidity. Twitch himself isn't the strongest in the early stages of the game, but with the current ranked climate, he'll get off a level 2 gank every single time and even gets away with it. He cannot farm, so if the champion doesn't get a kill early game, he just doesn't do anything up until later on. But the biggest issue with this champion is his scaling. The moment you hit the mid and late game, there's nothing you can really do against Twitch unless you flash into his face and one-shot him. There are no items you can build to itemize against him because his primary damage is true damage. And that's it. The annoying part here, however, is the first strike interaction on him. Every assassin is really snowballing the game with first strike and isn't required to farm as much. But if they're able to farm and gank at the same time, being very consistent, like for example a Kayn or a Gragas, then things get really dicey. But Twitch has another approach. He mainly uses his first strike gold to accelerate himself and then goes back into his jungle to collect the stacked up jungle gold. And then after this, he goes back to ganking to collect even more gold from his first strike. Other champions in the S tier are either high profile assassins or brutal bruisers. Anything below, for example, in the A tier takes too long to scale or is substantially weaker. However, for example, Fizz might be the exception. If this champion gets a slight lead, he'll one-shot you throughout the entirety of the game, and even Zhonya's will not be the difference. Other champions below in the B tier are just way too high risk and too little reward. Zedka is super slow and is required to have blue buff. Lilla really sucks into most of these champions because she dies before she gets close. Gwen can't really farm. Grace is an abomination of a champion and can't do anything before he dies. And all the other champions are just way weaker or just not favored by the meta currently. For the tank tier, we still have Volibear as the strongest champion for us, as he's able to just dive you on cooldown with his ultimate ability. Other champions, for example Amumu and Shen and Jarvan and Nautilus, are weaker in that sense, but still very good champions. And take notice here, I put Jarvan into the tank tier even though he can be played as a fighter, but he basically is the same in the carry tier. He is a very good champion now and offers many benefits towards his team. For example, if you have an AD carry that you can play around, you can utilize your first abilities Armor Shred in combination with Black Cleaver and completely remove most of the enemy's armor to let your AD carry completely take over. Other champions, for example in the A tier, provide little to nothing for the team with the exception of, for example, Nunu. This champion can spam ganks and be very annoying even played full AP, which then would make him also an A tier carry pick. And for the other champions, Warwick isn't really a champion, Sign takes a lot of time to scale and proper setup, and Mundo is a very situational pick. Next up comes the mid lane, and here I had kinda trouble to say who's the best champion. Many people say Zoe isn't as strong anymore, but she's still an absolute powerhouse when it comes to laning and overall scaling in the game. However, there are other champions that do her job easier and sometimes even better. Well, not really better, but they're more consistent because they're way easier to pull off. For example, I personally don't believe that Annie is a good champion in the way she functions because she's a one-dimensional champion. Her only play, literally only play, is flashing with the proto belt and ult right into your face. If you are aware of this, then she has no available play, and the other thing she can do afterwards is portrait lock you and send Tibbers onto your face to knock you up for a brief moment. But that's literally it. So what happens if you take your first tree in Resolve and then take her entire damage? You won't die because she doesn't have enough damage, and afterwards she's simply useless. That's why I don't really like her. But the issue with Annie in general is that people don't really pay any attention to her, and then things get really problematic because she gets to one-shot the carries because the carries walk towards her without even paying attention, and that's the problem. A way more annoying champion on the other hand would for example be Vladimir. This scaling is absurd and his damage is kind of annoying because compared to Annie, this guy doesn't really care about anything because he can just go right into your team with the power of his pool without you being able to stop him. I've also bumped up Twisted Fate because his first strike AP damage, especially if you dip into Nashers, makes him really powerful in the early and mid game and even the late game thanks to his gold card and CC being basically buffed due to people not being able to access any crowd control reduction unless they invest into it with runes or buying Quicksilver. All the champions below are just way weaker. However, Gragas might be the exception, but Vex is way too committal. However, you can also put up Ziggs if you really want to. But for the mid lane, he is not as consistent as the other champions above. And if we take a look into the B tier, we'd see that Kayle is there, and in all honesty, Kayle would require an entirely new tier, which is absolutely garbage. This champion is terrible. All the other champions are still playable, but not as powerful. For the assassin tier, I also have quite some troubles assessing who is the best champion right now. Is it Akali or is it Zed? You can basically say that both of these champions are absolutely crazy right now. However, we'll still roll with Zed, but you can obviously just pick Akali because he's absolutely broken right now. All the other champions are similarly as broken, but not quite there yet, with Diana being actually the weakest out of all of them. The only saving grace Diana has compared to all the other champions is her third ability's range, which is basically Narnia to New York. And with the changes to Pyke, I don't really know if we want to keep him as a mid lane assassin or completely remove him, but maybe next time, unless we see something very interesting, he'll be banished into the B tier. And for the next one, Riot did the big funny one. They buffed Jace for no apparent reason. This champion in the hands of the right people being able to execute him properly was absolutely nuts, especially in the mid lane. If anything, he struggled maybe in the Baron lane due to how the lane functions, but in the mid lane, he was an absolute machine, and he still is. I've also talked about this last time that Akshan is really strong early game and is still powerful mid game but struggles to close out games and needs teammates to do so. So we have the following problem. This champion gets fed every single time but cannot win games because he is not strong enough to do so. But he'll get fed and therefore give his team an advantage, which then should be enough to win games, right? But still, it's kind of a weird thing that we cannot really do anything about him, because if they get more buffs to Akshan, then this champion will be a big problem. Anyway, champions for example in the A tier are just doing anything worse than champions in the S tier, with probably the exception of Kai'Sa. If you truly want, you can put basically Kai'Sa in the place of Akshan and swap places with Kai'Sa in the tier list. That kinda works. Other than this, bruisers are still very much playable in the mid lane, but I will not list every single bruiser here because, well, that would basically explode the list. But champions such as Riven, Fiora, all of these champions are playable mid lane, but only in certain conditions and for the flex purpose. Now let's talk about AD carries. Corki is still the most annoying champion with the least effort required to play him properly. Other than this, we have Jhin, Tristana, Kai'Sa, Ezreal, Varus, Lucian, and Nyla, with Lucian actually being the weakest out of all of them. However, his saving grace is his laning phase, whereas Nyla is kinda weak during the laning phase. Also, Kai'Sa kinda sucks during the laning phase before her first abilities upgrade, because non-isolated Q spells and having no range to her advantage kinda makes her very vulnerable to all the other other champions in this list. Even just the Nyla can just jump into your face and kill you. And the funny thing is, Nyla kills all of the champions listed here if she gets close. The thing is, does she really get close to any champion listed here? Normally that shouldn't be the case, but if she gets close, well, you can kiss your life goodbye. All the other champions below in the A tier and B tier just do everything worse than champions in the S tier and are just picks that are very conditional. For example, Miss Fortune has a very good laning phase, Xayah is very good into champions that want to go into you, Caitlyn is an absolute lane bully that if paired up with a good player will absolutely demolish you, and Zeri will absolutely destroy you if she has a Yuumi by her side. Or let's put it this way, the Yuumi will absolutely neutralize the laning phase and you will always be able to escape with Zeri's third ability over a wall and therefore never be at risk of dying. And then as you scale throughout the game, you'll absolutely turn over anything in the terms of fighting and just take over the game. However, standalone, Zeri kinda sucks, at least laning wise. For the mages, we still have Lux as the most broken champion available. She can still queue through minions, still one-shots you, still is annoying, still has a shield and everything there is. It's just a champion that should actually be nerfed. Other champions in the S tier do her job, just substantially worse and with more risk involved. And champions in the A tier do basically everything even worse or don't do anything at all. For example, Morgana is a terrible pick standalone, but a decent pick if you have a Nautilus, a Galio, and most importantly, a Leona. A Leona amplifies your damage by so much you have no idea. Every single time Leona uses a spell, she applies passive Sunlight. If the enemy is CC'd on Morgana's puddle, the tormented soil, then every single time this soil deals damage, she'll proc the passive of Leona, and therefore amplifying the damage and getting them closer to the execution threshold, and therefore amplifying the damage even more. For the support role, we still have Rakan as the most annoying champion ever, then it's Gragas, Thresh, Nautilus, Galio and Ornn. Theoretically speaking, you could pick Leona up in there as well, but she's less consistent than the other champions unless you have certain combinations of champion that really enable Leona to be absolutely broken. For the Protect tier, we still have Soraka as the most annoying champion because you can just always blind pick her. There's no reason to not blind pick her anymore because in the past it was just has the enemy team melee champions, okay I pick Soraka and win the game, and nowadays it's just pick Soraka and win anyways. Nonetheless, we changed one thing and it's putting Yuumi up a tier simply because she's so annoying to deal with. It's not the inherent strength of the champion, it's still just the inability of getting her killed unless she wants to die. She can go completely even in lane and not play, and that's absolutely fine for this champion, which is a major issue. And if the Yuumi player has any idea on how to play, then she just deattaches level 1 and beats you up, because you can't really win against the Yuumi level 1. She has too many stats and can just safely attach if anything gets too risky. And if she's smart, she might even skill a third ability and just run you down. It's lovely, right? And champions, for example, such as Braum are just very good into all-in and, for example, denying Ornn's lovely engage. And every champion below in the A tier or B tier, just everything worse and it's just not really strong compared to the other choices. But don't get me wrong, they have their places. For example, Nami can dominate laning phases by being better than the enemy and provides decent setup with a wave. The same goes for Seraphine. She's very good into all-in teams, but other than this, she really struggles. And with all the buffs to Pyke, this champion needs to be the absolute god tier carry champion right now. Alternatively to this, you still have, for example, Seraphine and Lux you could put into the carry tier as well, but fundamentally speaking, they're still like type of protect champions, so I'd like to list them here, but they're also able to be like full carry champions. You'll build full AP anyway, regardless of what you're doing, so it basically makes no difference. Next to this, we have Senna as being an annoying piece of shit. You know Senna players, right? And if you are really annoying, you can go full resolve first tree and go for tanky stats. Let's just imagine you're playing into full AD enemy comp, and then you just go plated steel caps, you go Manamune, you go Gauntlet, you go Cleaver, and you have 50 billion KHP. And on top of this, since you're gaining crit passively for your souls, you can go even shield bow and become even tankier. This champion is still absurd, and I wonder why it's not played more often. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching. If you liked the content, see you soon for more RiftGuides content, and leave a like and subscribe to the channel.